Sydney Sweeney is officially returning as Millie Calloway. But this time the story is darker, quieter, and far more controlled than before. The sequel to The Housemaid isn't just another continuation. It's a calculated shift in perspective, power, and silence. And it may completely change how audiences see this character. Because what looks like a new job might actually be the most deliberate move Millie has ever made. And the most interesting part? This sequel isn't focused on shock, it's focused on choice. When The Housemaid first arrived on screen, it surprised a lot of people. On the surface, it looked like a contained psychological thriller. Simple setting, limited characters, a quiet story about a young woman trying to rebuild her life. But underneath that simplicity was something audiences immediately connected with, a character who watches more than she speaks. Sydney Sweeney's Millie Calloway wasn't written as a traditional hero. She didn't dominate scenes. She didn't explain herself. She observed. She adapted. And slowly she took control of her own narrative. That restraint is exactly why The Housemaid worked. And it's also why the sequel, The Housemaid Secret, is already generating serious attention, before production has even started. According to Lionsgate, filming is set to begin later this year, with Paul Feig returning as director and Michele Morrone once again playing Enzo. But the biggest creative decision is this. The sequel is based on the second book, not a loose continuation of the film. That matters, because the second book isn't about repeating the same situation. It's about escalation, psychological, emotional, and strategic. So what actually changes in The Housemaid Secret? Almost everything. In the first film, Millie enters a wealthy household with very little power. She needs the job, she needs the stability, and she accepts rules she doesn't fully understand. The tension comes from imbalance. In the sequel, that imbalance is gone. Publicly available information and comments from the cast suggest that The Housemaid Secret centers on Millie working for an entirely new family, under very different circumstances. This time, she isn't naive. She isn't guessing. She knows exactly how these environments work, and that changes the tone of the story. Instead of asking, "What is happening here?" the audience is now asking, "What is Millie planning?" Sydney Sweeney herself hinted at this shift when she spoke about reading the script. She described it as something she couldn't put down. Something delicious, not because of intensity, but because of how much control the characters have over the situation. That word choice matters, because The Housemaid Secret is less about revelation and more about intention. And this is where Michele Morrone's character becomes critical. Enzo was one of the most quietly compelling parts of the first film, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't say. In the sequel, according to cast interviews, his role expands in significance, not necessarily in screen time, but in influence. Amanda Seyfried, who played Nina Winchester in the original film, has already suggested that while her character may not return fully, the emotional and strategic impact of Nina still exists in the story. In a recent interview, she mentioned the possibility of a cameo and openly expressed curiosity about how Millie continues to keep Nina in her pocket. That phrasing is important. It implies that Millie's power didn't disappear when she left that house. It followed her, and now it's being applied somewhere new. Another major factor behind the sequel's confidence is Sydney Sweeney's role behind the camera. She isn't just returning as the lead, she's also serving as an executive producer, just like she did on the first film. That means she isn't simply reacting to the material, she's shaping it. And when actors take on that level of involvement, sequels tend to change in tone. They become more precise, more intentional, less interested in repeating what worked, and more focused on deepening it. This aligns with a broader trend in Hollywood right now. Actors using book adaptations, not just as performances, but as long-term creative platforms. The Housemaid isn't being treated as a one-off hit. It's being built as a controlled series of stories. And that raises an even bigger question. What does The Housemaid Secret actually want the audience to feel? One of the smartest creative choices behind The Housemaid Secret is what it doesn't do. It doesn't try to shock louder than the first film. It doesn't rely on surprise twists for attention, and it doesn't reset Millie's character back to vulnerability. Instead, the sequel reportedly leans into anticipation. The tension no longer comes from wondering if something is wrong. It comes from knowing something is wrong and waiting to see who realizes it last. Realize this is a subtle but powerful shift. In the first film, the audience learns alongside Millie. In the sequel, the audience is slightly behind her. That alone changes the entire viewing experience. And that's exactly why the sequel is being described as more psychological than dramatic. Freida McFadden's second book expands the story in a very specific way. Without revealing spoilers, it places Millie in a situation that appears familiar, but is structurally different. She's no longer reacting to hidden rules. She's navigating visible ones. That distinction matters, because when rules are visible, power becomes negotiable. And this is where the film adaptation has an advantage over the book. Cinema allows silence to work as strategy, a pause, a look, a delayed response. Sydney Sweeney's performance style fits this perfectly. She's known for emotional intensity, but here intensity is restrained, controlled, purposeful. That restraint keeps viewers leaning forward instead of bracing for impact, which is exactly what high-retention storytelling looks like. But the sequel's success doesn't just depend on performance. It depends on timing. The Housemaid Secret arrives at a moment when book-to-screen adaptations are everywhere. But audiences are more selective than ever. Not every novel needs a sequel, and not every sequel deserves attention. What separates this project is consistency. Same lead actress, same director, same tone. Paul Feig returning is especially significant. He's known for range, but here he's choosing precision over reinvention. That signals confidence. Studios don't lock in creative teams unless the internal data supports long-term value. And Lionsgate announcing the sequel before the release cycle of the first film fully cooled tells us something important. This wasn't just a hit. It performed exactly as expected, or better, which brings us to the quiet role Amanda Seyfried still plays, even off-screen. Even if Nina Winchester doesn't fully return, her presence lingers. Amanda Seyfried's public comments suggest that Nina isn't simply forgotten. She's a reference point, a reminder of who Millie used to be and what she learned. In long-form storytelling, that kind of shadow matters more than screen time, because the audience carries memory forward. Every decision Millie makes in the sequel is filtered through what viewers already know she's capable of. That creates tension without action, and that's rare. Controlled transition. At this stage, The Housemaid Secret stops being about a house and starts being about control. There's another layer to this sequel that hasn't been discussed much, but it's crucial. Audience expectation. People aren't coming back to see what happens. They're coming back to see how it happens. That's a risky position for any sequel. But it works when the character at the center is deliberate, observant, and patient. Millie Calloway fits that mold. And Sydney Sweeney understands that better than anyone, because she helped build it. So where does this story actually lead? Not to a conclusion, but to a realization. What makes The Housemaid Secret especially effective is that it understands something most sequels ignore. Silence can be louder than escalation. This film doesn't need bigger moments. It needs clearer ones. Millie doesn't rush decisions. She measures them, and the story gives her space to do that. That pacing isn't accidental. It's designed for viewers who are already paying attention, and for viewers who think they are. The tension comes from alignment. When the audience begins to realize that Millie is always one step ahead, the story stops feeling reactive and starts feeling inevitable. And inevitability is far more unsettling than surprise. Another important shift in the sequel is perspective. In the first film, we experience the world with Millie. In the sequel, we experience it around her. That subtle distance allows the audience to question not just the environment, but her methods. Is she protecting herself? Is she testing boundaries? Or is she simply applying lessons she already learned? The film reportedly never gives a direct answer. Instead, it invites interpretation. That's a deliberate creative risk, and one that tends to age well with audiences. And this is where The Housemaid Secret quietly separates itself from similar adaptations. Many book adaptations rely on explanation. This one relies on observation. Rather than spelling out motives, it allows scenes to breathe. Conversations end slightly early. Reactions are delayed. Those choices force the viewer to participate, and participation is retention. You're not watching to catch up. You're watching to confirm what you already suspect. That's why this sequel isn't positioned as a dramatic finale. It feels more like a midpoint, a chapter where the character fully understands her own leverage, which leads to the most important realization of all. The Housemaid Secret isn't about revealing something,